So I'm making this video because people ask me what the work I do is about, and how I help people, particularly in the second half of life. How it's kind of psychological, spiritual, religious. But the first thing I want to do is talk about society in general. Because we seem to be living in a society that's lost connection to source. And that's more so the upper end, I would say, than the lower end. And what I mean by that is we talk about Mother Earth and our Father that art in heaven, if you want to use that language. Because there is still some connection to Earth. And some people have can connect to source in that direction in their spirituality in that direction. And then I suppose at this end there are people connecting through mindfulness, meditation in various ways and forms, and some spiritual experiences. They might call it religious experiences. But I think mainstream, there's a massive disconnect from there's a massive reduction in people that would call themselves religious and theistic, and more people calling themselves atheistic, agnostic. So there's not a God, or I don't know if there's a God or not. I don't care. I'm not interested. I just want to get on with my life. And there's a bigger rise in that, I would say. And I can understand why, because a lot of what we've been offered, or certainly what we've been offered out there today, is quite warped and tainted and twisted and manipulated in terms of religion. And I'm going to dare to say it, what I see going on in churches. And that goes way back, hundreds of years, even back to Luther and Catholicism, and paying money to kind of be absolved of your sins, and paying money up front so you were in credit, and which was partly the start of it all, or a certain amount of it. Where there was certain body of Catholics that protested against some of that behaviour, that saying it wasn't, let's say, proper behaviour to be doing that sort of stuff. So they became the Protestants and eventually Protestants, which feels more like a noun than a verb. But for me, they were initially Catholic Protestants. And again, I would reuse that word differently. I wouldn't say Catholic, because again, it feels like a noun, in contrast to Catholic. Catholic Christianity suggests movement, feels more like a verb, more transformational, more catharsis going on through that Christianity than the noun kind of Catholic. Anode, cathode, cathedrals, catharsis. Anyway, so here we are in 2025, and I think we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I know we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, actually. Because as we reject what we're being offered in terms of modern day Christianity, I can't speak so much for the other religions, although I've looked at them a bit and quite enjoy some of them: Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, A lot of good stuff in them all. But what I also want to offer here is that from what I see, we are behaving in a way that is more, I don't know, I'm trying to watch my language here and not make it seem to err on one side more than the other, but I can't help it because I have paid more attention to Christianity than the others. So more holy in spirit, let's call it. And what I mean by that is, as we feel this kind of impetus within our being to reject what's out there, or many of us do, in mainstream Christianity, I suggest that we are actually behaving in a way that is more in keeping with the teachings or the deeper teachings of Christianity than what's actually going on out there and being offered in the name of Christianity. It is tainted, warped, twisted, misunderstood, taken too literally, I would say, in my opinion. And the spirit of it is lost. And that's a critical sentence there, the spirit of it. Um, so this inner spiritual guidance within us is telling us, call it our higher self, call it the Holy Spirit, call it what you will, a deeper, higher, whatever wisdom within us is saying no to this. But we're throwing the whole lot out when, as I say, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because there is we need help to see that there is a baby that we are throwing out with the bathwater. And an evidence of that baby is the fact that we are rejecting the bathwater. We can tell, we have that guidance within us that this isn't it. There's something very wrong here, and it's time to follow that guidance instead of this egoic kind of loop that plays in our head, where we get all caught up in beliefs, mindsets, fears, anxieties, coping mechanisms, what I call the ways of psychological functioning of the ego. Because we, as I see it, we come into the world as that pure divine essence, go into this, what we call the ego, this, we build an egg around ourselves in a sense. We don't come into the world in an egg, we create our own as necessary, all by higher guidance. So I'm suggesting that this higher guidance, wisdom, etc., has us take this chameleon-like form of adaptation into psychological functioning, where we as this psyche function through logic and reason, in relation to our individual particular environments in any given moment, so as to try to feel more safe. And we develop a personality, but we're always the same pure, true essence at the core of that, like a yolk becoming a chick, which then has to hatch. And as it has to hatch, it then has to break back out of the shell that it built to protect itself. And that's a big part of where we're all at and struggling. And there used to be the saying, life begins at 40, because that was often where people were beginning to awaken. We'll also quite flippantly talk about midlife crisis nowadays, and it's the same stuff. Spiritual awakening. We hit a crisis when there's a blockage. You stop paying your rent or your mortgage, you'll have a crisis. I don't know, don't put your rubbish out your house, you'll have a crisis. There's and so in this instance, given that we come into the world as that pure divine essence, adapt and then awaken, so there's a self-realization process where we continually come to realize what more and more of the true self that we are. Me, lost my thread. So in this self-realization process, awakening out of this psychological functioning to be able to be the true, I would call it, psycho-spiritual self, where we, as psyche, function more in line with our spiritual truth. Is that readaptation? But again, where I come at it from is that that's not something that's gone wrong. That's something trying to go right. This is a higher, wiser guidance that allows us to adapt as we need to for our particular environment, so we can adapt, survive in that particular environment, but adapt back out, self-realize towards full self-actualizing. And again, this is where we're seeing meditation, mindfulness, qigong, etc., etc. And religion, religion seeks to help that and serve that, but it also holds it back, because for me, the spirit of it's wrong. What else? So this ego development, because we talk about the ego and, well, you're full of your own ego, etc., where people are esteeming themselves. Look at me, look how big I am, look what I can do. That's actually healthy. And if the adults were actually esteeming the children wouldn't have to esteem themselves to get to a point where they're ready to transcend the ego level of functioning. I think the story of the Bhagavad Gita with Arjuna is a good example of this. And I'm not going to go into it, but it just jumps to mind. Having to adapt in childhood a certain way, then wants to take back his own kind of empire, and several hurdles that get in the way before that's achieved through Krishna's guidance, Christ's guidance, higher wisdom guidance. But the main reason for making this video, as I say, is because people ask me what I do. And this in a sense isn't what I do. This is more the kind of container that holds what I do in a more literal sense. And how we connect with that higher wires or get guidance is through our heart instead of our head. And so, here again, people do the same thing in society. Like, get out your head, get into your heart, or follow your heart, all of that stuff, without realizing they're actually being more spiritual in many cases than somebody that's gone to church since they were whatever age, for 50, 60, 70 years. Because for me, to be able to be more holy in spirit, and the spirit of our actions, is to follow our heart's guidance, which takes a bit of doing. So that begins to move towards the work I do, helping people to come more from their heart than their head, but not all the time when it's safe to do so. And most people aren't used to doing that, and it doesn't feel safe to do that, so the ego gets triggered to defend us from feeling weak and vulnerable and maybe being ridiculed, etc., either by our own judgment or that of others, or even coming to physical harm. But nonetheless, some of the work I do with people is that they'll bring a scenario, and they may come forward from a closed heart with kind of resentment, for instance. And some people that are Christian will use like Jesus and Holy Spirit and God as some projected kind of persona to connect to have a sense of what would God do, what would the Holy Spirit do, what would Jesus do, etc. And that's okay. But more modern teachings like A Course in Miracles, A Course of Love, etc., are nowadays helping us to see that we are that same divine essence ourselves. And so we can turn inward for that higher, wiser guidance. And people are doing this with each other all the time as well, but we're just not seeing it as the true kind of religious behavior, spiritual behavior. And it would be helpful if we were, because we'd be giving credit where it's deserved. So a part of the practice then is to, in these situations, is to turn to your heart, to get still, get present, be meditative, etc., and take your attention to your heart and see what it offers. And so that's a skill unto itself. And so you may get then a sense of, how to go forward from there, what maybe to say to a certain person. But that doesn't mean to say you're going to be able to say it, because you've got all sorts of other psychological issues that are going to try and hold you back. Mindsets, as I say, projections, maintaining cycles, shadows, there's all sorts of psychological defense systems, coping mechanisms, protective systems at play. Not trying to be negative, just doing a different job. And I refer to that as self-survival mode and self-fulfillment mode. And they're both trying to do slightly different jobs. This was doing its job, self-survival mode, earlier in life, but now we're at a point where we don't need it, hopefully, quite as much, quite as often, but still need it occasionally. And this is where we're trying to go to, being able to be our true self, that more loving divine essence, when it is safe to do so. So one is connecting to your heart and hearing what it offers you. Two is then being able to transcend your resistances to find something that you can do. And I've found in the almost 20 years I've been doing this work, when something does come from the heart, it generally will be doable. You just need to bring the hurdle down, which is where the coaching component comes in. You have a sense of what's wanted, what the reality is, and then how far we bring that down to find something that's doable. And then we're making some progress. So listening to your heart and being able to then follow your heart despite your resistances, and speak your heart's truth. There's another skill there in which could be for the other person, unless somebody has this practice and they're opening their heart to you, sharing their heart to you, because you then, the practice for you then is to let that in. If somebody's saying something nice and kind in relation to yourself, being open, being honest, etc., the practice for yourself is to entertain the fact that this is about them. This isn't about you, your opinions. You've got to watch your triggers, etc., and respect who they are and what they're about as that divine essence, just as you are, etc., with their stuff and your stuff, and see if you can receive, see if you can let that in. Because again, we tend to defend against love and block it, but because we don't want to get hurt. And again, this is the ego level functioning that's trying to protect us from being vulnerable and ending up in tears and feeling silly or laughed at, or all of that stuff. And that's actually a spiritual practice as I see it, but it's a more embodied, grounded, present spiritual practice. It's not a go to church on Sunday, listen to some stories from 2,000 years ago and sing some songs and come home. It's grounded, embodied, realistic rather than idealistic, pragmatic, applied. And again, if we come back to the word religion, then for me, that's what the word religion is actually about. It's about realignment. And if you look up the word religion, we used to say, if you look up the dictionary, but we don't tend to say that now. So if you Google the word religion, you'll see it says something like to realign or to rejoin, which suggests we were already there and we're now rejoining. So we've become derailed and we're getting back on the rails. And we had to derail to survive childhood. It's not something going wrong, it's something trying to go right. So for me, the word religion is rejoining, realignment, etc., which is the work I do that I help people with. And it can be applied to anything, your work, relationship, anything whatsoever. So to me, that's the real religion, that realignment to being able to be the truth of who and what we most essentially are, that loving divine essence in all of these human forms. And religions, etc., can help with that, as I say, or hinder it. So I suppose, in a sense, I'm saying I don't see any of the religions quite getting it right. And this is then, and therefore, a different offering of an understanding of the word religion that is more down to earth, more applied, more real. Yes, there's all sorts of spiritual practices, that the meditation and the mindfulness, etc., that in a sense almost dissociate us from our being human. And I don't think that's the answer. This is about creating heaven on earth. This is about it's not about checking out into a better experience, and then we can't cope when we have to come back into the world and go and buy petrol, a loaf of bread, etc. So whilst we can tap into those realms and get the downloads and the experiences and come to realize higher truths, we need to bring them back into the world and apply them, not keep checking out. What else? I need to watch the length of the video. I've no idea how long this is. So I suppose that gives you some insight into what I'm about, the ground that I come out of, what I do. It doesn't really give you any big insight into how I work, but it's not what this video is about. So how I work then is in being available to receiving guidance that comes to me in various ways. Sometimes it comes up from within me. Sometimes I just get a read of what's going on in the other person. Certain words will jump out that this person might be speaking, and then I just follow that lead and I go in there, not necessarily knowing why. Sometimes I'll get like a kind of flash. They usually come kind of diagonally of something that's like out of the blue, as we would say. Rather than applying any theories or coaching techniques or kind of psychotherapy techniques that I've been taught. I want, yes, they're all there, but I want to be more available to receiving from a wisdom, a different wisdom from those, I don't know what the word would be, kind of trainings and teachings, because they're horrible. To sit in the company of somebody that's following a training, can you say more about that and how does that feel? And you can just, again, the spiritual wisdom within you tells you that this feels horrible, because they're not truly present with the spirit of who and what you are and where you're at and what's going on for you. They're present more to applying a technique to you to get a particular outcome. And whilst it works, it's just horrible. So I suppose in summary that gives you some insight into what I'm saying about the word religion and about a different perception of the word religion, hopefully affirming to you that you probably are behaving in a more spiritual way than you realize. You're probably doing a bit of a spiritual practice just in following what you might call your gut instinct, but you're doing more than that. It's not instinct, there's also intuition. These two things are different. I've offered a bit of a spiritual practice there in terms of being in a situation where you just feel something's wrong, you're not being your truth, and finding a way by going to your heart. So you, as self-conscious awareness, go to your heart. If you get the chance, that's not easy. It'd be great if there's a big red pause button. But again, you can always follow one of the best techniques. It's a technique, I suppose, that I've found is just to be present to the truth. Can I, could you just give me a minute, folks, type thing? I'm struggling here. I'm in this conversation. I'm not enjoying it. I'm thinking about leaving, or whatever it might be. You've already gone to your truth. You might be looking for something clever, wise, whatever to say, but that's your ego. The spiritual component within it is daring to get present and speak what's moving. I came here to connect with you people because I like being here. I like being in your company. I want us to have a meaningful conversation, and it seems to be superficial or bitchy or nasty or um, just by getting present to the truth of what's moving for you and finding a way to voice it that comes more from your heart than from your kind of frustration or resentment. And again, that's some of the work I do and help people to develop that skill. Because when you move people to their heart by being in your heart, and it feels safe enough for them to do so, so you need to be in a safe environment for this to happen. And that's one of the main things I focus on in the groups that I run, is safety. To be able to even have that happen, because our neurological defense system will guard against that happening in the interest of protecting us. And you can begin to have more meaningful relationships that come from your heart. And when your kind of neurological defense system and your ego sees that you can behave that way, that was maybe too dangerous in childhood, in the school playground, for instance, so it has to recalibrate itself, and so it will, progressively move forward with regards to what feels safe to do, and you'll become less inhibited. And I know people are doing this all the time anyway out there, but not necessarily seeing that they're actually doing a spiritual practice, and that this is religion as I see it, or as I've been guided to see it, because a lot of this stuff came to me by revelation. And I'm not going to go into that just now. So I think I'm going to end with the kind of bigger, more overarching kind of statement within this, which relates to humanity and society, and how society is pretty lost because of that spiritual disconnect. And quite rightly so, rather than be in a sense of spiritual connect to something that is not it. So it's almost like a 40 days in the desert where we've separated from well, I don't want to say a womb into a kind of birth canal to a new womb, because this was never a real healthy. I suppose it got us to here, whatever it was, whatever's contained us, sustained us, nurtured us to get to this point. As I see it, society, humanity, call it as you will, is in this birth canal, looking for the new womb, the new container, the new connection, the new nurturance, and people are finding that in all sorts of ways, and this is one. But for me, it's the heart, learning to connect to your heart and follow your heart. And your head will find a way of doing that to be able to be the person you aspire to be, because you're only aspiring to be your true self only. And only. So I'm going to leave it there. I think I've said enough.